The night was colder than any she had ever faced, but still, she held tightly to the last piece of bread in her trembling hands. A small boy sat shivering nearby, his eyes wide and hollow, forgotten by the world just like she was. She did not know his name. She did not know his story. What she did know was that hunger was a pain neither of them deserved to bear alone. So, without hesitation, she tore a piece and offered it to him. What she could never have imagined was that this boy was the son of the man who had torn her family apart. The man responsible for every shattered dream she carried in her heart. That night, a simple act of kindness would begin a journey filled with betrayal, pain, and unexpected forgiveness. This is their story. The city never truly slept, but for those like Amina, its restless hum was more a harsh reminder than a comfort. Its streets twisted and turned like a sprawling maze, filled with shadows that swallowed the weak and the forgotten. The flicker of street lamps offered only fleeting moments of light, painting uneven pools on cracked sidewalks where dreams seemed to have long evaporated. It was in these broken alleys, between crumbling walls and discarded remnants of better days, that Amina wandered, a fragile figure with tired eyes and a heart heavier than her years. Amina was no ordinary girl. At just 12 years old, she had already known the bitter taste of loss and the cold bite of loneliness. The memories of her family had become blurred, like fading photographs left too long in the sun. Faces she once trusted, laughter that once filled the small rooms of her childhood home, all swallowed by the cruel grip of fate. Her parents had been kind souls, caught in a web of misfortune spun by men far beyond her understanding, men who wielded power like a weapon and destroyed everything in their path. She never spoke much about those days. There was no use in dwelling on pain when survival demanded every ounce of strength she had left. Hunger gnawed at her belly as relentlessly as the memories haunted her mind. Night after night, she clung to what little warmth she could find, whether it was a ragged blanket left behind by a passerby or the brief shelter of an abandoned doorway. The city was indifferent to the suffering it hid in its corners. But Amina, despite all the darkness surrounding her, held tightly to one fragile thread: hope. Hope was a dangerous thing in her world. It could lift her spirits one moment, then shatter them the next. Yet, without it, she might have surrendered to the void that threatened to consume her. Each morning, when she opened her eyes to a sky tinged with cold gray, she reminded herself that somewhere beyond these streets, beyond the shadows, there was a light waiting to be found. She did not know how or when, but she clung to that belief like a lifeline. Her footsteps echoed softly against the pavement as she made her way toward the market district, a place she avoided during the busy hours but frequented at dawn. There, beneath the awnings and between stalls piled high with discarded produce, she hoped to find scraps, forgotten pieces of bread, bruised fruits, anything to ease the gnawing emptiness inside her. The vendors rarely noticed the small girl, their eyes averted or clouded with their own troubles. She had learned to move quietly, blending into the background as if she were part of the city's crumbling scenery. As she crouched near a wooden crate, picking up a half-eaten loaf that had been tossed aside, Amina's mind drifted to the past once again. Her mother's gentle voice, telling her stories of kindness and courage. Her father's steady hands, the warmth of his embrace. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, a distant dream slipping through her fingers. The man responsible for tearing that world apart was never far from her thoughts, though she did not know his name. She only knew the pain he had caused, the silent suffering that followed her like a shadow. Yet even in this desolation she found moments of unexpected beauty. A stray cat brushing against her ankle, the soft chirping of birds hidden among the rooftops, the way the morning light turned the city golden for just a fleeting moment. These small things reminded her that life still moved forward, even when it seemed impossible. Her stomach growled loudly, breaking the fragile calm. She clutched the bread close, knowing it might be her only meal for the day. As she turned to leave, a faint sound caught her attention, the soft sobs of a child nearby. Her heart tightened. Hunger and cold were not her only companions. Loneliness was the cruelest. Following the sound, Amina found a boy no older than herself, sitting huddled beneath a rusted fire escape. His clothes were torn, his face smudged with dirt and tears. He looked as lost as she felt, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Without hesitation, she approached him slowly, offering the half loaf of bread. "Take this," she whispered, voice trembling but firm. "It is not much, but it will help." The boy looked up, startled, then nodded shyly, accepting her gift with trembling hands. In that moment, a silent bond formed between them, two lost souls navigating the unforgiving city together. Neither spoke of their pasts, but both understood the shared weight of survival. Little did Amina know this boy was not just another stranger. He carried secrets tied to the very man who had shattered her world. The truth that would unravel their lives was waiting patiently in the shadows, ready to emerge when the time was right. For now, all that mattered was the warmth of a small kindness, a momentary shield against the cold. Amina walked away, feeling the faintest flicker of something new, perhaps not just hope, but the possibility of forgiveness and redemption. The city around her remained indifferent, but her story had only just begun. Morning light spilled slowly over the city, painting the streets with a muted glow that barely touched the corners where Amina slept. Her footsteps carried her away from the fire escape where she had left the boy, the weight of the day pressing down like an invisible burden. She felt the rough texture of the bread still tucked in her small bag, a reminder of yesterday's fragile kindness. The city's noise was both a comfort and a curse, blending with her own thoughts like a restless tide. Every day was a struggle, yet the human spirit found ways to endure. In the marketplace, life was a constant push and pull. Some faces showed hardness born of necessity, while others revealed cracks of compassion beneath their guarded exteriors. Amina had learned to read these signs well, to decide whom she could trust, even if only for moments. She paused near a fruit stand where an elderly woman was sorting through a basket of bruised apples. The woman's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes held a spark that reminded Amina of stories her mother once told her. Stories about kindness surviving in the smallest acts. Summoning courage, Amina stepped forward. "Good morning, ma'am," she said softly. The woman looked up, surprised, softening her features. "Good morning, child. What brings you here? I was wondering if you might have anything you do not need. Some fruit, perhaps?" Amina asked, careful to keep her voice steady despite the emptiness she felt inside. The woman hesitated briefly, then reached into her basket and handed Amina a slightly bruised apple. "It is not much, but it is from my garden. Take care of yourself." Amina smiled, a rare warmth filling her chest. "Thank you." As she walked away, the apple felt heavier than it should, not just because of its weight but because of the unexpected kindness it represented. The city was not only a place of despair, it held moments like this, moments that reminded her there was still humanity left. Her thoughts drifted back to the boy she had helped, the one whose sobs had cut through the cold silence. She did not know his name, but the memory of his eyes stayed with her. There was something fragile about him, like a bird with a broken wing trying desperately to fly. Meanwhile, the boy, named Horace, wandered through the streets with no clear destination. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, haunted by shadows he could not name. Unlike Amina, Horace carried a secret buried deep within his family's name, a secret that tied him to power and pain far beyond his understanding. Horace was the son of a man who had risen through ruthless means, a man whose ambitions had destroyed countless lives, including Amina's family. But Horace himself was innocent of these sins, lost in the gap between legacy and identity. The burden he carried was invisible to most, but it weighed on him like a silent storm. Back in the marketplace, fate was quietly pulling threads together. Neither Amina nor Horace realized that their paths were destined to intertwine, that their meeting was the beginning of a story far more complicated than either could imagine. As the day wore on, Amina found herself drawn to the old library near the market, a place of quiet refuge amid the chaos. She slipped inside, grateful for the cool shadows and the faint smell of old paper. Books had once been her mother's refuge, and now they offered Amina a brief escape. She ran her fingers along the spines, lingering on stories of courage and hope. For a moment, she allowed herself to dream, not of riches or safety, but of a world where kindness was not a rarity but a rule. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the city transformed again. The harsh daylight faded, replaced by the dim glow of street lamps and the distant sounds of life carrying on despite hardship. Amina wrapped her thin jacket tighter around herself and began her search for shelter. The night was unforgiving, but she knew the streets better than most. She found a narrow alleyway between two abandoned buildings, a place where she could rest without fear. As she settled down, her thoughts returned to Horace. She wondered where he was now, if he was safe. Unbeknownst to her, Horace was somewhere close by, haunted by the same questions. Lost in his own turmoil, he did not yet understand the connection they shared, or the challenges that lay ahead. The city was full of secrets, and both children were caught in the web, their lives slowly drawing closer. In the quiet that settled over the night, one truth was certain. Survival was not just about endurance, but about the fragile connections forged in moments of kindness and trust. Tomorrow would bring new struggles but also new possibilities, possibilities neither of them dared to hope for yet. The first light of dawn barely pierced the thick haze that clung to the city. Streets that once pulsed with noise and movement lay eerily quiet, a stillness that hid the restless lives beneath. Amina stirred in her small nook, blinking against the weak glow filtering through cracks in the boarded-up windows. Her breath came in shallow, foggy puffs in the cold morning air. For a moment, she allowed herself to linger in the quiet, feeling the familiar ache in her stomach, the pangs that had become her constant companion. She thought of the boy, Horace, the stranger she had shared her last piece of bread with. His face haunted her, not because she knew him, but because of the vulnerability she had seen in his eyes. She wondered if he had found shelter, if he was safe from the harshness of the world. The city was unforgiving to children like them, yet it offered little comfort for anyone. Even the buildings seemed worn and weary, their facades cracked and faded, as if burdened by the stories they concealed. Amina pushed herself up, rubbing her hands together to chase away the cold. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she could not stay in one place for long. The streets demanded movement, and every day was a test of willpower and luck. As she stepped out, the city began to wake. Shopkeepers opened their doors, vendors arranged their goods, and workers hurried toward their destinations. Yet among this crowd, Amina remained invisible, a shadow slipping through the cracks. Her thoughts drifted to her family, the fragments of her past that played like ghostly echoes in her mind. Her father's steady voice, offering wisdom and strength. Her mother's gentle hands, weaving warmth into the coldest days. Their loss was a wound that no time could fully heal. She had heard whispers about the man responsible, a ruthless figure who had crushed hopes and dreams without remorse. He was a powerful man, respected and feared in equal measure. Yet Amina did not harbor hatred. Her heart was too weary for vengeance. Instead, she carried a quiet sorrow and a fierce determination to survive. The city was vast and so were its secrets. As Amina made her way toward the market district once more, she felt the weight of unseen eyes watching her. The truth was that the threads of her life and Horace's were drawing tighter, bound by ties neither understood. Meanwhile, Horace faced his own struggles. The son of privilege, he was trapped within the walls of a world he had never chosen. His father's name opened doors, but it also closed them, doors of compassion, freedom, and innocence. Horace had never known the warmth of a family that loved him for who he was, only the cold expectations of legacy and power. Yet beneath the hardened exterior was a boy longing for connection, for a chance to rewrite the story fate had penned for him. Their worlds could not have been more different, yet fate had decided they must walk the same path. That day, as Amina sought scraps of food and shelter, Horace wandered through the city's more affluent districts, surrounded by luxury yet consumed by emptiness. He was a prisoner of circumstance, unaware that the simple act of sharing bread had linked him to a future neither could foresee. The city's heartbeat was a steady rhythm, but its stories were irregular, filled with moments of despair and hope, pain and kindness. Amina and Horace moved through this tapestry, two threads destined to weave together. As night fell once again, the city's shadows grew longer. Amina found herself back near the alley where they had first met. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the city itself was holding its breath. She sat quietly, clutching the small bundle of food she had managed to gather. Her eyes scanned the darkness, hoping for a sign of the boy she had helped. In her heart, she felt a flicker of something new, perhaps the beginning of trust. Unknown to her, Horace was nearby, wrestling with questions he did not yet know how to ask. Their reunion was imminent, but the truth waiting to be revealed would challenge everything they believed. In the quiet that settled over the city, the first true connection between two lost souls was about to deepen, setting in motion a journey filled with pain, discovery, and unexpected redemption. Night wrapped the city in its cold embrace, turning familiar streets into shadowed corridors where every step seemed heavier than the last. The dim glow of street lamps flickered uncertainty, casting trembling light over cracked pavement and forgotten doorways. For most, night was a chance to rest, but for Amina, it meant facing another endless stretch of loneliness and hunger. She sat silently against the rough brick wall of a narrow alleyway, her body curled inward to preserve what little warmth she could gather. Her fingers gripped a small loaf of bread tightly, meager, torn, and barely enough to quell the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. Yet, more than hunger, it was the ache of uncertainty that weighed on her heart. Would the boy she had helped, the stranger with eyes full of sorrow, return? Would he remember the kindness she had offered? Or was she destined to wander the city's cruel labyrinth alone? The city's night was alive with sounds most would overlook: the distant bark of a stray dog, the soft scurry of rats rummaging through garbage, the faint echoes of footsteps fading into the distance. Each noise was a reminder of life continuing beyond her small corner, a life from which she felt painfully disconnected. Despite the hardships, there was something within Amina that refused to break. It was a fragile spark, born from years of hardship and loss, but kept alive by an unspoken hope. Her family had been ripped from her, torn apart by a powerful man whose name she dared not speak aloud. The man who destroyed her world lived in a different reality, one of wealth and influence, far removed from the cold alleys she called home. Yet, his shadow stretched long, casting darkness over every part of her existence. In that silent alley, Amina's mind drifted back to memories that were at once distant and raw, the laughter of her mother, the steady presence of her father, the warmth of a home she barely remembered. Those memories were like fragile glass shards, beautiful but sharp enough to cut. She had learned to carry them carefully, not allowing herself to be consumed by grief. Elsewhere in the city, Horace moved through streets that told a different story. He walked among polished windows and bustling cafes, places where privilege offered comfort but no peace. The son of the man who had caused so much pain, Horace lived in a gilded cage. His father's name opened doors and commanded respect, but it also closed his heart behind walls of expectation and fear. Horace's life was a paradox, a boy surrounded by luxury, yet trapped by isolation. He longed for something real, something beyond the empty privileges he had inherited. The memory of the small girl who shared her bread with him lingered in his mind, a symbol of a world he yearned to understand. That night, fate nudged their paths closer. Amina, still holding her precious loaf, heard soft footsteps approaching. Her heart quickened as Horace appeared from the shadows, his eyes searching, hesitant. They exchanged no words at first, the silence between them filled with the weight of unspoken stories. "You came back," Amina said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Horace nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I could not forget. No one has ever been kind to me like that." Amina studied him, seeing not the son of a powerful man, but a boy just as lost and afraid. "You do not have to be alone," she said gently. "Neither do I." Their conversation was simple, but beneath the surface lay a profound connection. Two lives fractured by different kinds of loss, finding solace in each other's presence. As the night deepened, the city's indifferent gaze softened around them. Amina shared what little food she had left, and for a few moments the harsh realities of the world faded. They spoke in broken sentences, exchanging fragments of their lives, a language of survival and hope. Yet the past was never far behind. Horace's father remained a looming figure, his shadow stretching over every corner of the city. Amina knew that the truth would surface eventually, and when it did, it would challenge everything they had begun to build. Despite the looming uncertainty, a fragile trust began to grow. Amina found herself daring to believe in the possibility of a future where forgiveness was not just a word but a lived experience. Horace, for the first time, felt the stirrings of a life defined by his own choices rather than inherited guilt. Together, they sat beneath the flickering street lamp, two lost souls wrapped in the cold night but warmed by the fragile ember of companionship. The city around them held its breath, waiting for the next chapter of their intertwined destinies to unfold. The morning light struggled to break through the thick, gray clouds hanging low over the city. The air was heavy, damp with the promise of rain, and the streets glistened faintly from a night's drizzle. Amina woke with a start, her body aching from the cold and exhaustion. Yet, somewhere deep within, a quiet determination had taken root. The night spent beside Horace had shifted something inside her, a fragile thread of trust, delicate but undeniable. She rose slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and tucked the remnants of their shared bread carefully into her pocket. Today was different. She could feel it, not in a grand way, but in the small, persistent flutter of hope she had not dared to feel for a long time. The city was unforgiving, but maybe, just maybe, the cracks in its cold facade could reveal something more. Her feet carried her instinctively toward the marketplace, that chaotic blend of noise and life where scraps of survival were fought over and shared in equal measure. The vendors were already setting up their stalls, shouting out prices and displaying fruits, vegetables and worn goods. Amidst the hustle, Amina moved quietly, her eyes scanning for opportunities, an overturned crate, a forgotten loaf, anything to ease the ache in her belly. As she bent down to pick up a few stale crumbs near a fishmonger's stall, a sharp voice cut through the morning chatter. "Hey, you're there." Startled, Amina looked up to see a man in a worn coat approaching quickly. His eyes were narrow and his tone was harsh, filled with suspicion rather than kindness. "What do you think you're doing? Stealing?" Amina froze, heart pounding, the crumbs slipping from her fingers. She knew better than to argue. Her world was filled with people ready to judge without understanding, to punish without mercy. She stepped back, ready to flee, when a sudden shout stopped the man. "Leave her be, Ahmed," another voice called out. It was Haris stepping forward from the crowd. His presence was unexpected but commanding. The man hesitated, glancing between them before muttering under his breath and retreating. Amina's breath caught, relief washing over her in waves. Haris knelt beside her, brushing dirt from her coat. "You do not have to face this alone," he said softly, eyes filled with concern. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of a promise, one that neither fully understood yet. Together they navigated the crowded market, an unspoken bond guiding their steps. Haris spoke little, but each word was measured and thoughtful. Amina found herself sharing small pieces of her world, how she survived, the empty spaces where her family once was, the fears that chased her like shadows. In return, Haris revealed glimpses of his own life, the loneliness hidden beneath the wealth and power of his father's name. He spoke of a house filled with cold silences, of lessons in control and expectation, and the yearning to break free from a destiny not of his choosing. The city moved around them, indifferent yet alive, as two unlikely companions found refuge in each other's stories. Later, as the sky darkened with gathering clouds, they sought shelter beneath a weathered awning. The scent of rain mingled with the earthy aroma of wet stone and fresh produce. Amina watched the droplets begin to fall, each one a small reminder of the world's unpredictability. "Haris," she said hesitantly, "why do you care? Why did you help me?" He looked away for a moment, then back with an honesty that surprised her. "Because I see in you something I lost. Hope, courage, and maybe a chance to be better than what I was told to be." Those words lingered between them, fragile yet profound. But the calm was not to last. News traveled fast in the city, especially about the son of a man as powerful as Harry's father. Whispers began to swirl, casting shadows over their fragile connection. People questioned why the privileged boy was seen with a homeless girl. Some saw scandal, others saw opportunity. Unbeknownst to Amina and Haris, their lives were about to collide with forces far beyond their control. The man who had torn Amina's family apart was watching, calculating the risks of his son's actions. For him, this was not just about a boy or a girl, it was about power, legacy, and the careful control of a narrative that could unravel everything he had built. That evening, as the rain softened to a drizzle, Amina and Haris sat together beneath the awning, the city's distant lights blurred through the mist. They shared a quiet meal, the bread broken between them more than sustenance. It was a symbol of a fragile trust beginning to form. Neither spoke of the looming dangers, but both felt them like a storm on the horizon. The night held its breath, waiting for the moment when truth would no longer be avoidable. For Amina and Haris, the crossroads had come. The choices they made next would shape not only their futures but the very fabric of the world around them. In the silence, one thought echoed louder than all else. Survival was not just about living, it was about finding the courage to face the past, to forgive, and to hope for a future written by their own hands. The morning came heavy with fog, wrapping the city in a veil of uncertainty that mirrored the turmoil swirling inside Amina's heart. The cold air bit at her skin as she moved quietly through the twisting alleys, her footsteps muffled by the damp cobblestones. Each breath she took felt thick, weighted not just by the chill but by the invisible burden she carried, the past she could never forget and the future she dared to hope for. Her thoughts returned to Haris, the boy whose presence had become a fragile anchor in her chaotic world. Since their meeting, he had been a quiet source of strength, a reminder that even in the harshest places, kindness could exist. Yet she knew their fragile connection was threatened by secrets neither was ready to face. Amina's family had been torn apart by a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones, his power immense, his cruelty whispered behind closed doors. That man was Harry's father. The weight of this truth was a shadow over every moment they shared, a barrier that neither could cross without pain. She had hidden this knowledge carefully, unsure if revealing it would shatter the fragile trust between them or bind them closer in shared understanding. But fate had a way of forcing truths into the light. Meanwhile, Haris wrestled with his own doubts. Raised in a world of privilege but starved of genuine affection, he struggled to reconcile the legacy of his father with the man he wished to become. The sins of the past were his inheritance, yet he longed to write a different story. As he walked through the city's quiet streets, he thought of Amina's courage, the way she faced each day despite loss and fear. She had survived what he could never imagine, and in her, he saw not just survival, but a fierce determination to reclaim life on her own terms. Their lives were woven together by threads of pain and hope, each unaware how deeply their stories mirrored one another. Later that day they met beneath the same awning where rain had once sheltered them. Amina's eyes held a question she could no longer silence. "Horace," she began, voice trembling slightly, "there is something you should know, something I have kept hidden." He looked at her, the weight of unspoken fears reflected in his gaze. "I have secrets too," he replied quietly. "Perhaps we are not so different." With a deep breath, Amina told him about her family, the love lost, the pain inflicted by his father's hands, the years of struggle that followed. Each word was heavy yet necessary. The truth hung between them, fragile and raw. Horace listened without interruption, the silence after her story filled with the gravity of what it meant. The boy who had seemed so distant now stood before her, open and vulnerable. When she finished, he reached out, taking her hand in his. "I did not know," he said softly, "but now I do. And I am sorry for what my father has done, and for the pain you have carried alone." That moment was not forgiveness, not yet. It was something more difficult. A beginning. The recognition that the past was a shared burden, but not an unbreakable chain. In the days that followed, their bond deepened. They moved through the city side by side, learning to trust not only each other but the fragile hope that a better future was possible. Yet the shadows of the past were never far behind. The man who had destroyed Amina's family watched with growing suspicion, his grip on power threatened by the unexpected alliance of his son and the girl from the streets. He sent envoys and whispered threats, subtle and sharp, meant to fracture what was forming. But Amina and Horace found strength in their shared pain, turning wounds into a source of resilience. One evening, as the city's lights flickered against the encroaching darkness, they stood on a rooftop overlooking the sprawling maze below. The world seemed vast and unforgiving, but in each other's presence, they found a quiet defiance. "We cannot change what has been done," Amina said, voice steady despite the weight of her past. "But we can choose what comes next." Horace nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Together we will face whatever comes." The city whispered around them, a symphony of hope and despair intertwined. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, they walked it not as lost souls but as companions bound by truth and courage. In that moment, beneath the heavy sky, the echoes of their past began to transform into the promise of a new beginning. A cool wind swept through the city as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with shades of orange and violet. Amina and Horace stood at the edge of a narrow rooftop, their eyes tracing the distant horizon where the sprawling city stretched endlessly. Below them, life thrummed with chaotic energy, people rushing home, vendors closing their stalls, and the soft murmur of conversations blending into a steady hum. Yet above it all, a fragile silence enveloped the two youths, a moment suspended in time between past wounds and future hopes. The truth they had shared weighed heavily on both, yet it was a truth that bound them closer than any words could. Amina's revelations about her family's destruction had opened a door that could never be closed again. Horace's apology was more than a gesture. It was the first step in a journey toward healing, though neither of them fully understood the road ahead. The city below was indifferent to their struggles, but up here, on this fragile ledge between darkness and light, their stories intertwined like threads in an intricate tapestry. Amina broke the silence first, her voice steady but soft. "It is strange, is it not? How can two lives so different be tied by the same pain?" Horace nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "I have always felt like I was living in someone else's story, a tale written long before I was born. But with you, I feel like I can begin to write my own." The wind carried their words away, but their meaning lingered. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, a glimpse of the humanity beneath the scars. Their companionship had grown steadily, a fragile yet unyielding thread of trust. They had faced suspicion, fear, and the cold judgments of a city unwilling to forgive. But in each other they found strength, a shared resolve to confront the shadows that haunted their pasts. Yet, beneath the fragile peace, dangers lurked. The man responsible for the destruction of Amina's family, Horace's father, was not a man to be crossed lightly. His power extended far beyond the city limits, and his wrath was as calculated as it was fierce. Rumors of his displeasure began to ripple through the streets, whispering warnings that the fragile alliance between his son and the homeless girl would not be tolerated. Amina and Horace both felt the growing tension but refused to let it dictate their lives. They knew that silence was no longer an option, that the truth, no matter how painful, must be faced head-on. One evening, as twilight deepened and the city's glow shimmered against the darkening sky, Horace spoke of a plan. "We cannot run forever," he said. "We must confront the past, not just for ourselves but for those who cannot." Amina looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. "But how? The man who hurt my family controls everything." Horace reached out, taking her hand gently. "Together we will find a way. It is time to stop hiding." That night, beneath the stars scattered across the sky, they began to prepare. Their conversations were careful and measured, a weaving of hopes and fears, strategies and dreams. The weight of their past was undeniable, but the promise of a future forged on their terms gave them a strength neither had known before. As days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. They shared stories of their childhoods, Amina's memories of laughter and loss, Horace's struggles within a gilded cage. Each revelation peeled back layers, revealing the complex humanity beneath the scars. In the quiet moments, they found solace in small things: a shared smile, a whispered joke, the comfort of presence. These moments were fragile jewels in a world that had offered so little kindness. The city around them continued its relentless pace, but for Amina and Horace, time seemed to slow. Their journey was no longer just about survival but about reclaiming agency in a world that had tried to define them by their pasts. One evening, as they stood once again on the rooftop overlooking the city, Amina spoke with a quiet conviction. "No matter what happens, we must hold on to who we are becoming. The past may shape us, but it does not have to define us." Horace nodded, a fierce resolve shining in his eyes. "We will face whatever comes. Together." The city's lights flickered beneath them, a constellation of hope amidst the darkness. Their story was far from over, but in this moment, it was theirs, raw, imperfect, and filled with the possibility of redemption. A heavy silence hung over the city as dusk settled like a velvet curtain, dimming the harsh realities beneath its surface. For Amina and Horace, this silence was a canvas on which countless unspoken thoughts painted their fears and hopes. They sat on the cold rooftop once again, side by side but lost in their own reflections. The city below was a vast expanse of lives intersecting and diverging, each street a story, every window a glimpse into someone's world. To most it was just noise, a background hum to daily survival. But for Amina and Horace, every distant sound, every flicker of light carried meaning. Since sharing their truths, their connection had grown stronger, yet the weight of what lay beneath remained. Both carried wounds inflicted by others but carried inward as scars. The difference was now they faced these scars together, their friendship a fragile shield against the darkness. Amina traced a crack in the rooftop concrete with her finger, her mind drifting to the past she had tried so hard to bury. Memories of laughter that once filled her home, now replaced by echoes of loss and silence. Her parents' faces appeared in her mind, not as distant ghosts but as pillars of strength that had shaped her into who she was. She glanced at Horace, his profile etched against the fading light. Despite his privileged upbringing, she saw in him a reflection of her own struggles, a boy trapped by the expectations and sins of a legacy he did not choose. "Horace," she began softly, "do you ever wonder if we are more than the shadows cast by our past?" He looked at her, eyes searching. "Every day. But I believe we are. It is the choices we make now that define us." Their words hung between them like a delicate promise, both understanding the fragile power of hope. As the night deepened, they spoke of the future, not as distant dreamers but as architects of their own destinies. Horace shared his fears of the man who ruled his family with iron fists, a man who would never forgive what he saw as betrayal. Amina revealed the quiet determination that had kept her alive through years of hardship. Their conversations were not always easy. Tensions flared, memories stirred painful emotions, and the weight of reality pressed heavily. But within these moments of vulnerability lay the seeds of trust, slowly growing into a bond that neither could deny. Yet, beneath their growing strength, threats loomed. The powerful figure who had shattered Amina's family watched with cold calculation, his network of influence tightening like a noose. He understood the danger in the alliance between his son and the girl from the streets, an alliance that threatened not just his control but the carefully crafted facade of his power. Unseen messengers delivered warnings, subtle yet sharp. Friends turned into informants. Doors once open now closed with a finality that spoke volumes. Amina and Horace felt the walls closing in, yet they refused to retreat. Instead they chose to stand together. One evening, as rain began to fall in soft, steady drops, they took refuge in an abandoned warehouse on the city's edge, a place of shadows and forgotten memories. Here, away from prying eyes and whispered threats, they planned their next steps. The air was thick with tension and resolve as they laid out their hopes and fears, the fragile plans for justice and redemption that seemed both distant and urgent. "We cannot undo the past," Horace said, voice low but firm. "But we can expose the truth. We can give voice to those who have been silenced." Amina nodded, eyes bright with determination. "And we will do it together. No matter the cost." The storm outside mirrored the storm within them, unpredictable, fierce, yet cleansing. As dawn broke, the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the fragile truth beneath the surface would finally rise. The city had never felt smaller to Amina and Horace than it did in the days following their decision to confront the truth. Every familiar alley, every crowded market, even the quiet rooftop where they had found moments of peace now seemed tinged with danger. The walls of the city, once just a backdrop to their lives, felt like they were closing in, pressing tighter with each passing hour. Amina woke before dawn, her breath visible in the cold morning air. The chill seemed sharper, more biting than usual. She wrapped her thin coat tighter around her, but warmth was elusive. Hunger and exhaustion gnawed at her, but something heavier weighed on her mind, the growing presence of unseen threats. Her eyes scanned the dimly lit street from the doorway of the rundown building she called home. Shadows moved in the distance, figures too deliberate to be mere passers-by. She swallowed hard, heart pounding. She had been wary before, but now the city's indifference had turned into hostility. At the same time, Horace faced his own trials. The walls of privilege he had once known offered no protection here. The cold look in his father's eyes when he had learned of his son's connection to Amina was a warning, a promise that his choices would come at a price. Their alliance, once a fragile hope, was now a beacon that drew danger closer. Despite this, Horace refused to back down. In the rare moments away from his father's watchful gaze, he sought out allies, people who had suffered under the same regime of fear and control. He met with activists, journalists, and those whispered about in the darkest corners of the city. Each conversation was a thread in a growing web of resistance. Amina, too, found strength in unexpected places. Children who once eyed her with suspicion now greeted her with smiles. Strangers offered what little they had. It was a quiet rebellion of kindness in a world that seemed to have forgotten it. Their days blurred together, plans made in whispered meetings, hurried escapes through winding streets, stolen moments of rest beneath the stars. The risk was immense, but so was their determination. One evening, as rain began to fall in thick sheets, Amina and Horace met in the abandoned warehouse they had claimed as a sanctuary. The air was damp and cold, but their spirits burned bright with purpose. "We cannot hide forever," Amina said, voice steady despite the fear beneath. "They will come for us." Horace nodded, his jaw set with resolve. "Then we will be ready. The truth will be our shield." They pored over documents, testimonies, and whispered rumors, evidence of the cruelty that had shattered lives, the corruption that poisoned the city's heart. Every detail was a weapon, every fact a spark that could ignite change. Yet, with each step forward, the danger grew. Shadows lengthened, and the city whispered warnings in the language of fear. The man who had destroyed Amina's family was not a man to be crossed lightly. His power was a fortress built on fear, loyalty bought with silence, and influence that reached into every corner. He sent enforcers to remind them of the consequences: silent threats in dark alleys, broken windows, a note left where only Amina could find it, stop or lose everything. But loss was no longer something they feared alone. It was a price they were willing to pay for the truth. As the rain washed the streets, Amina and Horace stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The city was closing in, but their resolve was unshaken. Together they would break through the walls of silence and fear. The city never sleeps, but for Amina and Horace, the nights had become restless battlegrounds. Each shadow whispered threats, every unfamiliar sound a reminder that their fragile hope was under siege. The sense of safety they once grasped slipped further away, replaced by an unrelenting tension that clung to their bones like a second skin. Amina's hands trembled slightly as she held the worn piece of paper, the collection of stories, facts, and names they had gathered over weeks. Each line was a testament to pain and injustice, the voices of those silenced for too long. The burden of these truths felt immense, yet it was the only weapon they possessed. She looked up to see Horace across the room, his face etched with fatigue and worry. The young man who had once been sheltered by privilege now wore the heavy mantle of responsibility with quiet determination. Neither of them spoke. Words seemed too fragile in the face of what was to come. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent life, unaware of the storm gathering in its heart. Days earlier, the first cracks had begun to appear in the carefully built walls of control. Whispers of Amina and Horace's alliance spread quietly at first, then louder, carried by those desperate for change. The evidence they had compiled found its way into hands willing to listen. Journalists, activists, and a few brave officials who had long watched the corruption in silence. But with exposure came danger. One evening, as Amina returned from a clandestine meeting, she felt the unmistakable chill of being followed. Her pulse quickened, breath shallow as footsteps echoed behind her through the narrow streets. She dared not look back, instead quickening her pace until she found refuge in the shadow of a closed shop. Minutes later, Horace appeared, concerned about flooding his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her body still trembled. "They are watching us closer now." It was a reality they had known was inevitable, but the fear was no less sharp. Their enemy was ruthless, a man who had destroyed lives without remorse, wielding power like a weapon. Yet Amina and Horace stood firm, their resolve fueled by the belief that truth was worth any sacrifice. That night, they met with a small group of allies, huddled in the back room of an unassuming cafe. Plans were laid to release the information safely, to protect those who would speak out, and to rally the city's fragmented voices into a force that could no longer be ignored. The weight of their task was clear, but so was the necessity. "The moment of reckoning is near," Horace said, voice steady but filled with urgency. "We must be prepared for the consequences." Amina's eyes met his, shining with fierce determination. "I am ready." As the days passed, the city shifted. The once silent streets buzzed with quiet defiance. Posters appeared overnight, testimonies spread on whispers and hidden networks, and the fortress of silence began to crumble. But the price was high. Threats escalated. Friends disappeared, homes were vandalized, and the safety net they once had frayed dangerously. The man who had long ruled with fear was striking back, desperate to maintain his grip. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Amina and Horace sat side by side, the weight of the world pressing down on them. They had come to a breaking point, a moment where courage was the only choice left. "We cannot turn back," Amina whispered. "Not now." Horace reached out, taking her hand firmly. "No. We move forward whatever it takes." Outside, the city howled with wind and rain, a fitting backdrop to the storm within. Their journey was far from over, but in the depths of struggle, they found a powerful truth. Resilience was born from the darkest moments. Together, they prepared to face the inevitable, knowing that the fight for justice was a battle of both hearts and minds. The breaking point had arrived. The city was changing, though it did not announce it with fanfare. Instead, the transformation crept slowly through the narrow alleys, the crowded markets, the flickering street lights, places where hope had long been buried beneath layers of fear. Whispers that once trembled in shadowed corners grew bolder, voices that had been silenced began to rise. The pulse of rebellion quickened with every passing day, threading itself into the fabric of a city desperate for change. At the center of this shifting tide were Amina and Horace, names now spoken quietly but with reverence by those who dared to dream of justice. Neither had sought this role. Neither wanted the spotlight. But necessity had thrust them into it, their stories intertwined and inseparable, their courage a beacon in the gathering dusk. With visibility came vulnerability. The enemy, once a distant figure cloaked in the safety of power, revealed his hand with brutal precision. The man who had shattered Amina's family and who ruled the city's underbelly with cold calculation unleashed waves of retaliation designed not only to intimidate but to break spirits. It began subtly at first. Friends who had once stood beside them now vanished without explanation. Safe spaces became battlegrounds, where the slightest misstep could mean ruin. Their network of supporters, delicate as spider silk, trembled under the strain of constant threats. The city's silent watchers, the ones who had kept quiet out of fear or apathy, started to look away, unwilling to become targets themselves. Amina felt the weight of it all keenly. One morning, she awoke to find her few remaining belongings scattered across the cold floor of their hideout. A message, crudely scrawled in black paint, stretched across the cracked wall. "Stop or be forgotten." The words were sharp, brutal, a reminder that every step forward came at a price. But rather than instilling fear, the message only deepened her resolve. She showed the warning to Horace that very morning. His jaw tightened, fists clenched in silent fury. "He believes fear will control us," Horace said, voice low but fierce. "He is wrong." Together they gathered their closest allies, those few brave souls who refused to surrender. In the dim light of a cramped room, their voices were cautious but unwavering as they adjusted plans and hardened strategies. The path ahead was treacherous, marked by unknown dangers, but retreat was not an option. To turn back now would be to betray every sacrifice made so far. Even in the darkest hours, moments of humanity shone like fragile stars. Horace found unexpected comfort in Amina's presence. The quiet strength that had carried her through years of hardship now steadied him. And Amina, for the first time since her family was torn apart, felt a warmth beyond mere survival. The warmth of companionship, trust, and something tender budding in the shared struggle. Their days became a careful dance of hope and caution. They moved through the city's maze-like streets with heightened awareness, exchanging whispered secrets and cautious smiles. The bond forged between them was not just born of necessity but of a shared mission and a deep understanding of what was at stake. Together, they were tethered against the encroaching darkness. One night, under the flickering glow of a dying streetlight, Horace reached for Amina's hand. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of unspoken promises. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "know this, you are not alone." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Neither are you." Their fight had evolved beyond a battle for justice. It was a fight for identity, for the right to define themselves rather than be defined by the past. Every step forward was also a reclaiming of their humanity. Yet as the pressure mounted, cracks began to appear within their enemy's own fortress. Whispers of dissent and betrayal seeped through the ranks of his loyalists. His iron grip, once thought unbreakable, showed signs of strain, stretched thin by the relentless push from those who refused to remain silent. But desperation breeds cruelty. The man who ruled with an iron fist grew more ruthless, launching attacks with increasing ferocity. Amina and Horace narrowly escaped ambushes, sought refuge in shadows during the darkest hours, and endured sleepless nights haunted by threats and memories alike. The cost of truth was rising, but their determination never faltered. In the midst of chaos, a ray of hope pierced through. A trusted insider, someone long embedded within the enemy's circle, was moved by the courage of Amina and Horace. Risking everything, this mysterious ally began to leak critical evidence. Documents, recordings, and first-hand accounts that revealed the depth of corruption and cruelty at the heart of the regime. This revelation breathed new life into the resistance, igniting a spark that grew quickly into a beacon of hope. The city held its breath, waiting for the silence to break, for the truth to rip through the lies that had suffocated it for so long. One quiet evening, in a room lit only by flickering candlelight, Amina and Horace prepared to release the truth to the world. Their hands trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. Every detail, every name, every piece of evidence was a weapon, one that could topple empires but could also invite retribution. "This is our chance," Horace said softly, voice steady despite the weight. "To rewrite the story." Amina met his gaze, determination blazing in her eyes. "For all who have suffered. For all who still hope." They sent the evidence into the hands of those who could make a difference. Trusted journalists, activists, and global watchdogs. The city's heartbeat quickened, as if sensing the fragile promise of justice pulsing through its veins. The unraveling had begun. From the highest towers to the narrowest alleys, the truth began to spread like wildfire. Walls of silence cracked, loyalty shifted, and long-buried secrets clawed their way into the light. The empire built on fear and deception was weakening, its foundations shaken by the courage of two souls who refused to be broken. But the path ahead remained perilous. The enemy was far from defeated, and the cost of change was yet to be fully borne. Yet in the eyes of Amina and Horace burned a fierce resolve, the knowledge that even the darkest night must give way to dawn. Together they faced the unknown, ready to see the story through to its end, no matter what it demanded. The city stirred with a restless energy, as if it had been holding its breath for too long. The truths that Amina and Horace had fought to reveal spread like wildfire, igniting hope and fear in equal measure. What was once whispered in shadows now blazed across walls, broadcast through stolen signals and hidden networks. The reckoning was no longer a distant threat, it was here. Amina stood at the edge of a rooftop, the city sprawling beneath her like a living, breathing entity. Her eyes scanned the maze of streets and alleys, the faces she saw in her mind's eye, the children who had smiled at her despite hunger, the old woman who had shared her blanket, the lost boy whose hand she had once held in silent solidarity. Their stories were woven into hers, threads of a tapestry that no longer wanted to unravel. The weight of everything pressed down on her, yet beneath it all, a fierce determination burned. She was no longer just a girl who had lost her family, she was a voice for those who had been silenced, a symbol of defiance against the darkness that had claimed so much. Behind her, Horace approached quietly, his footsteps soft on the cracked concrete. "They are coming," he said simply, his voice steady but laced with tension. "Tonight it will all come to a head." She nodded, swallowing the knot of fear in her throat. "We have done everything we can. Now we must be ready for whatever comes." Together, they descended into the city's underbelly, where the battle lines had been drawn. Not just in streets and buildings but in hearts and minds. Their allies gathered in hushed clusters, faces illuminated by the flicker of candles and the glow of handheld devices. The air was thick with anticipation and the quiet hum of strategy. Horace moved among them, offering words of encouragement and reminders of why they fought. "This is not just about us," he said. "It is about every person who has suffered in silence. Tonight we stand for them all." Amina felt the eyes of those around her, young and old, weary but unbroken. In their faces she saw the reflection of her own journey, the scars of pain, and the spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. The enemy's forces were vast, their power rooted in fear and control. But the cracks that had appeared in their armor were widening. The city's pulse quickened, fueled by the courage of those who dared to believe in change. As night deepened, the first clashes began. Silent battles fought in whispers, coded messages, and secret meetings. The resistance moved with careful precision, striking where the enemy was weakest, exposing the lies that had held the city captive. Amina and Horace found themselves at the center of the storm, their every move watched, their every word a potential spark. But they moved with purpose, guided by the belief that truth was a weapon more powerful than any threat. In the quiet moments between chaos, Horace pulled Amina aside. "We are close," he said, eyes searching hers. "But the final steps will be the hardest." She nodded, the resolve in her heart unshaken. "We will face it together." The city seemed to hold its breath as dawn approached, the horizon glowing with the promise of a new day. The reckoning was underway, not just a battle of power but a reckoning of conscience and courage. In the breaking light, the city's story was being rewritten, one truth at a time. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the city, casting long shadows that slowly faded into the warmth of morning. It was a quiet dawn, but one heavy with significance, a silent witness to the battles fought through darkness and fear, to the courage of those who refused to surrender. Amina stood on the rooftop once more, the cool morning breeze brushing against her face. Below, the city stirred awake, its heartbeat steady but changed. The streets, once heavy with silence and despair, now buzzed with a fragile hope. It was a city scarred but alive, wounded yet healing. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the cold nights when hunger gnawed at her bones, the moments when giving up seemed easier than moving forward. But through it all, she had carried a spark inside her, a stubborn light that no shadow could fully extinguish. Beside her, Horace watched the rising sun, his expression a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. The boy who had once lived under the shadow of his father's cruelty had grown into a man who dared to challenge the darkness. "This city has changed," Horace said softly. "Not because of us alone but because people dared to hope." Amina nodded. "We were the voices that refused to be silenced. But the true strength lies in every hand that reached out, every heart that believed." Their victory was not a neat story of heroes and villains. It was messy, painful, and uncertain. Lives had been broken, sacrifices made, and the path ahead remained fraught with challenges. But for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of possibility, a chance to rebuild not just buildings but trust and community. As they stood together, memories of the past mingled with the promise of the future. Amina's thoughts drifted to the boy she had shared her last piece of bread with, the boy who had been both stranger and kin, burden and blessing. Their intertwined fates had brought them here, to this moment of reckoning and renewal. A gentle voice broke the silence. It was the old woman who had once shared her blanket, now smiling warmly despite the hardships endured. "You have carried more than your share of sorrow," she said. "But you have given the city something it desperately needed: hope." Amina smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Hope is the light we must carry even when the night is darkest." Horace added, "It is not just a word. It is a call to action, a reminder that even the smallest voice can echo loudly." The city below was waking, but for Amina and Horace, the real awakening was within, the courage to face a future that was uncertain but filled with possibility. They knew the fight was far from over. Shadows still lingered, and the scars of the past would not fade quickly. But they had proven that even in the depths of despair, light could find a way. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the city in golden light, Amina and Haris made a silent vow to carry the stories of those who could no longer speak, to stand as guardians of truth, and to nurture the fragile hope that had been born in the darkest of nights. Their journey had begun with a single act of kindness, a piece of bread shared between strangers. Now it was a story that would echo through the streets, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. And as the city breathed in the new day, so too did its people breathe in the promise of new beginnings.